policy exchange, and it's been a wonderful few days worth of programme here. Can't be stressed enough, but I think definitely one would wish to answer for one, obviously express appreciation to all our guests for coming, but to no one more than Dmytro Nataluka, from Chairman of the Ukrainian Parliament's Economic Affairs Committee and the UK Ukrainian all-party parliamentary group, who's been so important a voice in his country's affairs on the front line. Please just join me in expressing appreciation to him. As I say, we have obviously outstanding casts today who require no introduction from me. What we're going to do is to have all of our very important panel today talking for 3 minutes apiece, which I will seek rigorously to enforce, because there's so many people here, so many people who have such a compelling interest and so much to say in the audience as well. And they're going to take 3 minutes. Going to have then a few questions here from myself as moderator, and then throw it open to the floor. Usual House rules here. You know, no question too outrageous. You just have to state your name and organisation first. So with that, if I could turn first to Air Marshal Edward Stringer, Senior Fellow at Policy Exchange, formerly head of the Defence Academy, previous to that, Senior in the RAF, one of the most heterodox thinkers in the UK Armed Forces, which is why he's here today. Ed, we always enjoy hearing what you have to say. Please, 3 minutes.
Thank you very, very much, Dean. And I just echo the sentiments you said at the start. The Ukrainians are fighting and dying, and if they get it right, we will be the ones that will benefit. Therefore, I believe there is a great moral imperative on us to help the Ukrainians in their war of national survival. To that end, I think I want to break this down to an argument about teeth v tail, because the popular historians write books that many of us love to read, and they're all about the teeth arms. They're all about Battle of Britain fighter pilots, and they're all about tank crews at Tel Alamein. But it's the tail what wins wars. And then when you read your history, all wars are economic in the end, and they all come down to mobilising a tail, and they all come down to being able to simplify and scale. And when you can do that and mobilise that across alliance, then you can prevail. And so I've always seen this conflict as one where the West was going to have to provide, within certain political constraints, which I think Biden and Jake Sullivan are making clear, within certain constraints, the tail that allows the Ukrainian teeth to remain sharp and remain chomping away on the Russian invasion. That, I think, emphasises questions about the defence industrial base across NATO and in this country. I think there are great advantages we might explore. We formed the Joint Expeditionary Force a few years ago, and we therefore have a convening authority across a huge chunk of NATO to standardise. And I think what we're seeing now, the problem is if you try and scale when everybody has a different rifle, everybody has a different type of 155mm ammunition. These are problems. We've forgotten the strategic lessons of the Second World War. My old job, Director General Joint Force Development, doesn't exist anymore, but I tried to set that up to be the J7, which is the organisation that keeps keeping your theory of winning ahead of that of the opposition. I think Ukraine has been very good at this. A sclerotic kleptocracy like Russia is not very good at it. And it's merely the manifestation of what Darwin said. It is not the survival of the fittest, it's he who can adapt quickest who wins. And therefore there is an element here of brain power and the freedom that comes with democracies, and that's what we need to mobilise in support. I think Ukrainians have done a fantastic job. In 2019, Mikhail Fedorov was appointed by Zelensky to digitise across the entire executive, and that included the military, and that is what has allowed Ukraine to produce a whole country effort across all of the socio-economy to get behind their armed forces. We used to have the Royal Observer Corps in the Second World War. That's now on an app, and every Ukrainian can report cruise missiles coming in. It feeds into a command and control. It's very clever, and they are moving quicker than I would suggest at the moment than we can in well-established NATO. So what I would say here, Dean's only given us 3 minutes here in summing up is, and I think what we ought to address is what's motivating Ukraine is, of course, necessitas mater inventum. This is a war of national survival. This has given them the impetus to move with the risk appetite that they need to do and do things really quickly. And so my question that maybe we ought to discuss later on, and given what's at stake for us here in the geopolitical situation that we find ourselves in vis-a-vis Russia, but also China, is are we going to see that this is a real strategic opportunity, but also, if we get it wrong, a strategic risk for us, and we need to step up as the Ukrainians have. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you. Maria Lane, welcome, President of Boeing for UK, Ireland, and the Nordic region. I've got that all right.
Yes.
It's a bit of a mouthful. A region of obviously of increasing strategic importance. We're delighted to be able to partner up with Boeing today here, obviously on the front line of innovation. 3 minutes.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Lord Godson. And thank you. It's my pleasure to be here on behalf of the entire Boeing company. We're very pleased to be sponsoring this important discussion at a seminal time for the entire defense ecosystem. But first and foremost, I want to acknowledge the people of Ukraine. We just have to commend them for their incredible bravery, fortitude, and sacrifice that they have exhibited over the last almost 2 years. And Boeing stands proudly in solidarity with the Ukrainian people. In fact, we have 1,100 employees based in Kiev. And I want to note that 100 of those employees were added after the war began. We have intentionally and purposefully continued to hire, employ, and take care of our people in the Ukraine in their valiant fight. And we just have to be so impressed with the heroism and the grit exhibited by the Ukrainians. So we have a lot to learn from that. And I think that's why this discussion is so important. There's a lot of lessons to be learned for both government and industry, and that is what the purpose of this discussion today will be. And as we talk about partnership with the Ukrainians, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about our partnership with the United Kingdom. And to also note the genesis and the roots of the Boeing history with the United Kingdom began 80 years ago in 1941, also in a time of crisis, also in a time of war in the European theater. And it was the first time that the Boeing Defense opened its doors in the United Kingdom, opened up our office to support our platforms that were supplying the war efforts, starting with the B-17 bomber. So over time now, we've gone from the B-17 to the C-17 to the P-8 to the Apache to the Chinook to now soon the E-7. We have continued to build up our capability here, and as we have continued to build up our capability here, we have continued to grow our footprint here. And I think while we have 1,100 employees in the Ukraine, we now have 4,000 Boeing employees in the United Kingdom, and an equally important supply chain of 650 strong, 650 UK companies that are supporting the Boeing company's programs worldwide to the tune of 13 billion pounds in investments that we made in supply chain spend since 2015. The reason this is important is because this is about partnership. So it's about how do the primes work with the government? How do the primes work with their tier one suppliers, with small and medium-sized enterprises, with the entire aerospace ecosystem, with academia, because that is all coming into play for how do we deal with the threats of the future. So I think it's going to be important, and I really look forward to giving you some more detailed examples of how we are addressing this, because it is something that our collective future depends on collaboration. And I think when we talk about being allied by design and looking at international partnerships and looking at how do we leverage the strength on strength with what we're all able to bring to the table, that is how we're going to get through this crisis, and it's how we're going to address the future. So with that, I just look forward to having a broader dialogue and with my esteemed colleagues on this panel.
Brilliant. Thank you. Dmytro Nataluka, I know that Lenin always denounced what he considered the sin of spontaneism, but since we reached out to you almost spontaneously on Saturday night, and you're here at fantastically short notice, and you initially, I think, rejected my call, but it wasn't the FSB calling, it was only Policy Exchange. So we're delighted to welcome you here. You're amongst friends, as you know. Please.
It was actually a small dog on the photo. So first and foremost, thank you very much for all your kind help and support to all of the wonderful people of the United Kingdom and its government, and giving the amount of the families from Ukraine you have provided shelter with, the amount of the support you have provided to defend ourselves. You are literally lifesavers. So thank you very much for that. I really mean it, and we appreciate it a lot. So thinking about this war, I think that the point Putin is trying to make is a very dangerous one. Basically what he's saying is that progress does not matter, technologies do not matter, modernity do not matter. What matters is merely the amount of people able to hold a Kalashnikov in hands and just run down towards the trenches. Because we haven't seen a very sophisticated Russian army in this war, have we? Not at all. What we have seen is an incredible amount of people able to go directly towards the enemy trenches, either armed or sometimes even unarmed, and to try to outnumber literally everyone with their life force. And if he's right, if the world and if we will let him get away with it, if we will let him prove his point, that what matters is the quantity of the population, then we are living in a very dangerous world. Because I don't think there are a lot of countries that can match the population of countries like Russia, China, or other countries. So this is the reason why this war has to be so sophisticated from our side, why we have to learn to use the most progressive weapons, why we need to put so much emphasis on science, on technology, on modern equipment, and how to use it. And this is why we have to prove Putin wrong. This is why we all have to win. Thank you very much for having me here.
Secretary of State, you certainly hit the ground running since you got into your latest appointment. Always welcome here at Policy Exchange, also forging relationship with your own newly minted counterpart in Ukraine, Minister Umerov. 3 minutes, we'd love to just hear the latest on from your new vantage point.
Thank you very much. Well, I really like my Ukrainian opposite number because Minister Umerov, as you say, has actually been in post less time than I have, so which I appreciate. I actually just wanted to take a moment to address an issue that's just been raised, and I know we're going to talk about innovation as well, but which is actually about the moral case for war, this war in particular. Right at the beginning of the war, a 6-year-old was at kindergarten, and across the road from his kindergarten, the apartment block was hit, not his, somebody else's apartment block. And that was the moment that his mum, Snez, and grandmother, Hannah, decided that they should leave the country. And they did, along with their dog, Max. And they came and actually lived with my family for a year, and they left last April from our house. This summer, I had the opportunity to go back to Ukraine for the first time, to Kyiv. And I went to his kindergarten, and I looked across the street exactly to where I knew that block was from photographs. Only the missile bombed out shell of the apartment wasn't there. The Ukrainians had already rebuilt it and re-inhabited it. Now, apart from wanting to know how the hell they've got their planning system to work so damn fast, I think it said a lot more about the spirit, the undeniable spirit and courage of Ukrainian people, that in that speed and that time, which at that moment couldn't have been more than about 17 months, they managed to rebuild that apartment block. The wider point that I wanted to make is I have a concern which is at the margins, but nonetheless I think has been growing, about the longer-term nature of this war, which requires resupply of arms, and it requires companies to go and do that directly. We've done a lot of gifting. We've provided lots of weaponry. We also need that weaponry replaced. BAE are a good example. They're setting up the first, I think, foreign factory in Ukraine, which is fantastic of them to do. But there is a class of sort of activist investors that will tell you that for ESG reasons, you shouldn't invest in anything to do with military defense and provision. And I just say to those people, if you look at 6-year-old, now 8-year-old Nikita, and the way that he was essentially bombed out of his home city, and made to move by an illegal, despotic, war or despotic leader persecuting an illegal war, it is obvious to me that it is wrong for companies to be disinvested on the basis of providing military support, whether that's conventional sort of military weapons or the type that we're likely to talk about more this afternoon, which is how weapons change over a period of war. And just on that point, it's quite clear to me, I was in Ukraine again for my second visit last week, this time as Defence Secretary, meeting President Zelensky, and the big changes, the phase in the war where at first we were sending out weapons that essentially were surplus to requirements, were quite traditional in nature, guns as in fire, long-range fire, etc. But it's moved now much more to unmanned aerial weapons, for example, drones, and the level and speed of development, and that going on literally in garages throughout Ukraine, is astonishing. I was privy to some of the information which they shared with me. In wartime, you can do all sorts of things much quicker than you can in peacetime. I mentioned that apartment block and the astonishing speed at which they had rebuilt it. That is the kind of speed of development that we're seeing in Ukrainian defensive weapons, and it's far in excess of anything that the West would consider normal.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'll just ask now a few questions of my own, and then I say hand it over to the audience. Secretary of State, just obviously early days yet for you, but just give a little more flavour about how this war, in terms of your early briefings, what you've learned is how this war has changed, how the MOD views the world, views its own role, the configuration of our own forces in the UK.
I think this war's actually confirmed something that I've always thought about defence, which is the danger with the MOD is you spend all of your time, hard money and cash, fighting the last war, by which I mean preparing for the last war, assuming that wars have changed permanently and it will now be whatever the last war looked like. So what's this war been like? Well, 2 or 3 years ago, there was a perfectly proper live debate during one of the defence reviews about whether we needed tanks anymore. But actually, we find ourselves sending Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine and them pulling in tanks from elsewhere, tanks still being useful. We've had debates about size of armies and infantry, essentially. In our case, that hasn't been part of this conflict at all. In the case of Ukraine and Russia, Russia in particular, where they have, as has been mentioned, just ruthlessly sent men over the top in a way that we probably haven't seen, so ruthlessly since the First World War. People have been, people on the ground, the army has been absolutely pivotal. I can carry on, but I think you already get my point, which is it is impossible to predict the specific type of technology that you will require for the next war that you fight. And so my opening observation is that we should always prepare our military for as many different possibilities as is reasonably possible. And in our case, with a military which does stretch from land to sea to air and to space and to cyber forces, that does mean making sure that we have got comfortable coverage in each of the areas, and that we're working with our allies, particularly where we might have less strengths or where we can project our strengths more. So I think my opening analysis would be never be fooled by thinking that just because in this war, for example, drones may turn out to be absolutely definitive in some way, that therefore we should divert the rest of our military budget to drones, expecting the next war to require them as well.
Thank you. Dimitra, just obviously a whole of society approach, whole of society mobilization has been taken by Ukraine. Just a little more on the mix of the technologies which the West is working with you on and what's going on at the grassroots. What can we learn in the West on our side from, if I can so describe it, a new Ukrainian way of war?
I absolutely agree. I think that we have to dare to experiment, and we have to stay open towards some suggestions, towards some options that were considered in a way, people were skeptical about. Like with the FPV drones, for instance, it costs you £800, but it takes out a tank that is worth tens of hundreds of millions of dollars or pounds. And FPV drones can be produced en masse. They can be scaled. This is precisely what the honorable gentleman in the beginning has mentioned. So what we are now talking about is literally how to develop, so to say, a flying Kalashnikov, meaning a drone that is not that very much sophisticated, but that you can produce in extremely large numbers, and that you can replace the spare parts with, and the spare parts that can be printed on 3D printers inside the country, for instance. And solutions like this, I think that right now they become more and more obvious. But then again, of course, is giving the population the full access towards creating and providing ideas in this market. And we have witnessed it in the very beginning of the invasion, when simple IT engineers were literally sending their propositions to the MOD, to the general staff, to any military guy who they know, solutions like how do we track the moving forces with our phones, how do we put geodata on the photographs, and how do we assemble them, and with machine learning we can trace the trajectory of a squad or a division, where they're going. And those were people who had nothing to do with military before the invasion started. So they were just experimenting, they were just trying to help in any ways possible. And because the government decided to accept those ideas, to engage those people, to give them the freedom of creating, to give them the funds for developing and updating the solutions, I think we are at the point where we are now, when the military tech is booming, military soft is booming, and for a reason, a very unsolicited one, but in a way, Ukraine has now a whole new industry, composed mainly by people who were never ever into the military before. So this is, I think, the main point.
Thank you. Maria Lane, just a little, obviously intense 24 months here for the UK in terms of defence transformation and so on. Just a little more detail from you on how you view, the UK's present position. One, obviously the Ukraine war, AUKUS, quote, use the phrase a few years ago, tilt to the Indo-Pacific, etc. Just a little more detail in terms of how you and Boeing see that.
Yes, absolutely. So we are definitely living in a dynamic environment right now. I think certainly it was welcome, what we read in the Defense Command Paper refresh. Certainly in terms of, we couldn't agree more that more partnership and collaboration between government and industry is absolutely needed to find solutions at the outset. I mean, that is probably the key issue, is again, the lesson learned out of what's happening in the Ukraine, or did we also learn it in the COVID crisis? Necessity is the mother of invention. When you're in a crisis and you have to figure it out, yes, you do, but it might not be always the ideal way to do things. So the farther we could get ahead of things, the earlier that we can have the discussions. And I think, again, this is what the UK is embarking upon. We're seeing it in many other countries. As the Ukraine war hit, I was in a really interesting situation. I was in my previous job sitting in Washington, D.C., overlooking the Pentagon out of my window. And at that time, I was responsible for global business development. And the frustration and the angst and the pain that we all felt was the fact that I had all my customers from around the whole world descending upon me all at once, saying that now they want the equipment that we had been talking about. They want it now, and they want it in triplicate numbers. And of course, it is difficult for industry to provide highly complex aerospace structures and systems and platforms and capabilities overnight. So the further we can get ahead of it, now we did get ahead of it, and we were able to address, we were actually very proud of the mobilization efforts that took place in support of the Ukraine. And that was thanks to the collaboration with the US government and all of the other governments from around the world through the security assistance agreements, where we were able to provide munitions, weapons, certain solutions that have been critical at the front lines. So we're very proud of our ability to do that. But again, we need to find a more systematic way to do it so that it is not just in a time of crisis that we're able to do that. I think AUKUS presents an incredible opportunity. We are very bullish about that in terms of particularly Pillar 2, and when we talk about the technology opportunities for future development programs and what we're looking at, it goes back to this idea of when you've got such incredible partners as the US, UK, and Australia, if we can collaborate together early and upfront, do the co-investment up front, figure out what is that roadmap. You know, industry needs certainty to be able to satisfy their shareholders and to be able to map out the future and make those investments. We're able to do them, but actually having that dialogue and communication and articulate a strategy up front with government on what are we trying to accomplish together is what is needed to get ahead of it. Now, AUKUS presents that opportunity, and it's also a great moment in time to try to break down. We've been strong advocates of breaking down some of the trade barriers, some of the export control rationalization that needs to happen to allow us to collaborate more coherently on the most important technologies. And I think that's what we are embarking upon now. And I think UK transformation is ideologically aligned right now with those same principles. So we're really looking forward to what can come out of that.
Thank you for that. Air Marshal String, I think you may be the only person on this platform who has commanded men and women in battle as commander of the Libyan air operation. But the question, I think, hanging over all our proceedings, two very quick ones. Long, big questions, but nonetheless, we need quick answers from you. One, who's winning and what do we need to do in order to play our part with innovation to winning to the outcome we all desire?
Who is winning with the theory of winning is definitely Ukraine, and they are more than holding their own at the moment. But it is quite possible that if Putin can hold together his coalition, he can, to put this crudely, put a conscript in front of every Ukrainian bullet. And then he will hope to tire out the West. I come back to the teeth v tail. What the West now has to do is work out the theory of winning and how to resource that at acceptable cost. And so my thought here, perhaps for the Secretary of State, who now will, I'm afraid, have been immersed in the depths and depravities of the MOD's procurement processes, how would you ask the Royal Air Force to build a cardboard drone? Because our own drone programs at the moment have been going on decades and will buy in the low tens. The Ukrainians are burning through 10,000 a month. So what we have to do is imagine quickly how we resource the fight that is emerging. Secretary of State's quite right to say future fights will look different. So I say now, invest in things like the drone farm that can adapt for the ones you'll need for Taiwan to the ones you might need for the Gulf if Iran kicks off. In other words, create that agile defence industrial base, because not only does Ukraine need it now, we will need it very soon in the near future.
Thank you. And just one or two further thoughts from you about Secretary of State about defence partnerships. What works, what doesn't?
Just on that drones point, I absolutely agree with the Air Marshal's comments, which is that whatever happens in the future, drones will be a part of war. They're not going to be uninvented and sent away. And actually, when you look at something as when you see it at Shahid, the Iranian drone, and you think back to V1 and V2s, V1s in particular, and the way they flew and cut out and just suicide drones that come down with some extra guidance and things, of course. But actually, you can see the heritage of that. But it's very easy to imagine swarms of drones in the future, and a lot of that tech and work's going on. And actually, we've been people literally in a field in a warehouse in a shed in Wiltshire, coming up with the latest kind of ideas of things we're actually getting into, careful how far I go on this, but things that we're able to provide it's useful assistance in a surprisingly quick manner, given our usually very lengthy procurement processes. But look, I think the allies part of this is essential for the reasons we've just heard, which is that Putin, and by the way, I entirely agree, Ukraine is winning. They've taken back half of the territory that Putin took. The biggest new development's been in Crimea, where in the last month we've seen Russian submarine destroyed, ship, the most importantly of all, the ports that they were in, and headquarters, the second headquarters, and other things. So the war is still a moving feat. But I think that the Allies' point is most important. Next week I'll go to NATO, where there's a wider contact group, which surprisingly is NATO plus enough countries to get to 50 countries, all in support of Ukraine. It's actually a group that the United Kingdom started. We handed the leadership of the group over to the Americans, and it's been continuing all the way through. I met them last week, so these are regular meetings, and it's how we help to coordinate our help and assistance. Working with allies is remarkably important. Working with allies in a way that helps to prevent potential future. The smart thing to do is think about where some of those alliances might strain in the future, and therefore be working in advance of that to make sure that we know what we need to do in a variety of different scenarios, which may sound a bit mysterious, but I think you will understand that we see a changing platform all the time. What's happened in Poland, what's happening in other elections in Europe, what might happen elsewhere in America, for example. And so we need to be ready for all of these different shifting alliances, and particularly the United Kingdom, which has led at every single stage when it's come to the Ukrainian war.
Thank you. Dimitra, just on the sort of unique bilateral relationship which has grown up between Ukraine and the UK, just a little following on from what Secretary of State just said, just the opportunities which that could create for both countries with their very different needs and interests, notwithstanding a very close alliance in the current war to defend your country. How might both countries use the leverage that they acquire through that bilateral relationship to leverage better outcomes on the wider European stage?
Absolutely. I think that this relationship that we have, that we share, is a very unique one, because I am absolutely confident that the UK is our boldest ally, to be honest. And the amount of what you have done, guys, is just unimaginable, and we are very thankful to all of you for this. I think that with the technology and with the weaponry that has been provided in the beginning, and even today, we have learned a big deal from how to operate the most sophisticated and the modern technologies. But what we have, unfortunately or fortunately, is a very short feedback loop. And that is extremely important in order to provide upgrades, in order to modernize, in order to adjust everything to the conditions of war that before that have been only theorized about. Right. So right now we know what is extremely efficient, what requires modernization, what needs an upgrade, and that it happens so that we can test it literally on a daily basis. And I think this is something that both of our countries can benefit from. That taking the most modern technologies and upgrading them according to the demands of the battlefield, with one of the most powerful army in the world. I mean, at least it's something it used to be before they decided to invade. But this matters. This matters because I think that this is precisely, the practice and being on the ground is something that is very significant for the development and the evolution of the weapons, of the technologies. And I think when we think about the Ukrainian Miltech and the way right now it reminds us all of the .com boom and the emergence of the Silicon Valley in the States. We have a same feeling that basically in garages all around the country, in some closed shops, students and young professionals are literally producing some new technologies with their own hands and with something that you have also provided us with, and modernizing it. And I think if we would be able to establish a joint program for modernization and scaling this kind of thing, I would dare to say that probably both of our countries will get access to the kind of weapon technologies that are unprecedented. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria Lane, final question in this section, just on your view of dual-use technology and how they might fit into your vision of defence transformation. Bye.
Yeah, I think dual-use technologies are absolutely critical, and they are a part of the future. Boeing, fortunately, we are lucky to have, we're dual-use by nature, you know, having such a robust commercial aircraft division and such a robust defense division. And we actually stood up a services division that is based on taking the commercial and defense sustainment solutions and combining them into one business unit for the absolute purpose of ensuring that our defense and commercial practices are cross-pollinating, and we can take the best practices out of those fields. And when you think about, you know, even the products that we've delivered to the UK, the P8, the E7, you know, those are commercial derivatives. They're based on a 737NG commercial aircraft platform, because why on earth it would be nonsensical to pay for the non-recurring engineering when you've got a perfectly good aircraft, turn those into defensive solutions when you've got the commercial basis on it already. So I think this is something that we need to continue to advance. One of the things that we also point out, you know, certainly for here in the UK, as we worry about how do you maintain the health of your aerospace defense industrial base, the best way to do that is to have them working on both commercial and defense programs, because that cross-pollination is where you get the best of both worlds and where you get the best practices and where you get cost efficiencies, and you can leverage good solutions out of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know there'll be lots of questions here. We've got a few more minutes. Who do I see wanting to ask the first question? Yeah. I guess we've got gentleman at the front there first. Yes, please. Yes. Name and organisation, please.
Absolutely. John Blundell, I'm a councillor in Coventry. Quite rightly, you've made reference to the... Russia isn't fighting this war alone. They do have allies. North Korea, Syria, Eritrea, Belarus, of course, and probably the most powerful ally is Iran. Now, a while ago, the Wagner Group, which of course is a Russian-backed sponsored militia, was proscribed by the British government. But there has been talk, and I think this is going back to the beginning of the year, about proscribing the Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And I just wondered what the current position is with the British government and the proscription of that particular organisation. Thank you.
Very good.
Straight off the bat. Yes, prescribing organisations always seems like a very obvious thing to do. There can sometimes be good reasons not to do with which are related to sort of intelligence gathering and things that I won't go further into. But it is certainly a matter under under consideration at all times.
Anyone else want to come in on that on the platform? Nobody. Just sorry, Air Marshal Stringer.
One of the things we need to be pushing now is to maintain the sanctions regime against all those who would support Russia even after the conflict ends, until you have an end to Putinism. As I say, there's a difference between warfare, which we obsess on, and war, and winning the strategic competition. And that diplomatic effort must continue.
In light of the reference to Wagner Group, of course, the late Prigozhin started providing catering for Kremlin events. I'm glad to assure everyone here that the admirable catering at the back is not supplied by the Wagner Group. Here, apart from moral reasons, we weren't quite sure about enforceability of contract if their supplies didn't quite come up to scratch and our standards. But I saw somebody else there. There was a question in the yes, two people there in the middle. Thank you. Name and organisation, please.
Barry Rhodes from Castledown FM. I'm very proud to live and work in Salisbury Plain and to see our Ukrainian friends there training. I just want to ask, what more can we do for our friends in Ukraine? And Secretary of State, I know that you were misquoted in the Sunday press. Can you guarantee that our troops will not be going on foot into Ukraine?
Well, first of all, thanks for just mentioning the Sunday Times. They have apologised and they did change the headline immediately. I'm not sure whether it wasn't just misquoted, it was completely erroneous. I think there may have been a confusion over my decision to send troops to Kosovo. I'm not sure whether that was the headline issue that strangely intervened, but they removed it immediately and it wasn't followed. elsewhere. What is the case is as I mentioned before, we've now trained, actually I didn't mention in here, but 50,000 Ukrainian troops. The figure's often put at 25 or so. The reason it's 50,000 is I'm going back to the Crimea invasion rather than the recent one, and it's an enormous contribution, which I saw in Salisbury Plain on Friday, actually, and met some of the Ukrainians training in 20 days, now 18 days. That particular batch will be going to the front line. It's really very sobering to see. The point that we were discussing, and I was discussing also with President Zelensky last week, is that it's important that we don't just continue to train, because you bring people over, it's very time-consuming, very resource-consuming, but we train the trainers so that Ukrainian trainers can train in country. I think that is also where there may have been some confusion. And so those are programs that we're actively looking at. We're also increasingly internationalizing that program. So I met Australian trainers. Last week before last, I met with my Canadian counterpart, who's the Defence Minister Blair from Canada. He had been down to Salisbury Plain and see it for himself. I think you can be very, very proud to be from that area. We have done a lot of good, and I know that it's hugely appreciated. But I suspect it's probably not quite understood how much it's appreciated. So I'll just share, some of you may have heard me mention this in a different fringe, but I'll just share with you what President Zelensky said to me last week about the British contribution overall, not just in training, but it was off the back of a training conversation. He said that when the war is over, there'll be a new book to write about Ukraine. And the pages will be blank, but the first chapter should be written by the United Kingdom. Which is, yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Dimitro.
Yeah, I would like to add just one small thing to that. So we think that this war has been in three phases right now. The first one, the war of people, the war of armed personnel of units, then the war of artillery, now the war of drones. What I think is that the next stage will be the war of information. The Russians are very good at spotting the smallest fractures and the smallest cracks in our societies, in the West, and they literally are very fast at trying to identify them and rip them apart, to pull those fractures and to disintegrate the whole that is supporting Ukraine in this war, the Western democracies. And I would really appreciate if the UK might use its global influence, its soft power, also to communicate with other governments and other countries how important it is to keep on the support, to not make the U-turn, to keep on pushing until the very victory, our joint victory. So this is another thing that I think is very, very sensitive, and we can see how fragile Europe is now, with new elections in different countries, some countries that are still neutral, regardless of the situation, that are still buying Russian gas, that are still circumventing the sanctions. And what we want to do is to keep the unity, keep the alliance, and keep the pressure. Thank you.
Thank you. Another gentleman there, over there, been waiting patiently. Your name and organisation, please.
Thanks very much. George Grills from The Times. Secretary of State, you've previously mentioned that as the front lines in Ukraine stabilise, it could develop into a country like Israel, an advanced economy, but with a hostile neighbour and periodic flare-ups. But to become like Israel, it might need Israeli quality of air defences. I think you mentioned you are going to Israel, particularly as the Iranian-Russian relationship develops. Do you think Israel could ever be convinced to adopt a less neutral position, perhaps, and might you even ask them to supply Iron Dome to Ukraine?
Yeah. I should say, actually, although I was talking about that earlier, it was actually Deputy Prime Minister Kubrikov, I think, who said that to me about Israel. In fact, I think he had just come back from Israel when he had the conversation with me in August. I'm speaking to Israel. I'm not about to go there. I think there is always again, without kind of overstepping what I can say, I think there's always a role for the United Kingdom in using what we just heard, not just our hard military power as the biggest military spender in Europe, in NATO, but also our soft power. And that's where we can help to bring parties together, and both publicly, for example, we've been first in with a whole range of different forms of weapons, from the tanks to the long-range missiles, Storm Shadows, and other people have followed in each occasion. I think also diplomatically we can help a lot. So without betraying those confidences, I can certainly confirm that we are always keen to be, first of all, very clearly on the side of right in this war, which is, let's not forget, it is always wrong for a neighbour to invade another democratic neighbour with no cause whatsoever and no threat to its own security before having done that, and that's what Russia did to Ukraine, and that we will always work with partners to try to bring the assistance that is required. I will leave it there.
Thank you. Air Marshal Stringer.
I've been invited to go out to Ukraine to talk to their Air Force about how they develop what we're calling poor man's air superiority. Yes, and I think we should help them develop it, because we don't have much, as our policy exchange paper from a year ago said, by way of defending ourselves in this country against missile attack. It's one of those dirty little secrets we've all owned up to in corners of the MOD, but felt we could fund more pressing requirements. I think one of the lessons of Ukraine is that we will have to work with our allies for our own version of Iron Dome for here, and if we can spread the costs across many interested parties, then so much the better.
Good, thank you. I know there'll be other questions. Who else do I see? Gentleman there in the middle. I think you've got to name an organisation, please. I can't see who it is because the lights are so bright. Forgive me. It preserves my neutrality.
John Wilkin, Chairman of the Salston Group. How do you think the outcome of this conflict will influence China vis-à-vis Taiwan?
Air Marshal.
It's a question of Western resolve, isn't it? And I think if we are seen to set our stall out and then say, well, it all got a bit difficult, then appropriate lessons will be drawn in Beijing, and I think it is that simple. So I think two things will be thought through in Beijing. One is that macro strategic point about the resolve of the West. The second, it will be thinking through lessons, and if we can show that we can actually intervene to make targets so hard that it is not an easy military operation, and the People's Liberation Army of China has not fought any sort of war, let alone a major one, since 1972, and an amphibious assault across 113 miles of quite sometimes stormy waters is always difficult. So I think the way we handle this and how we set ourselves up as we leave this confrontation will have a major impact on the geostrategic calculations in Beijing, and we should be very much aware of that.
Dimitra.
So the Italians, they have a saying, boia chi molla, meaning that the one who lets go is an executioner of the common cause. Because the moment you let go, the cause is doomed. So in a way, what I want to say is basically countries like China, countries like North Korea, countries like Iran are watching this war for a reason. And the reason is whether the West is still as strong, as influential, as powerful as it used to be, or as everyone considers it to be. Is it just an image? Is it just a game of smoke and mirrors? Or is it pure power? And the thing is that what is power right now? Power is economics, isn't it? The more you can produce, the more money you can provide, the more influential and powerful you are. Again, if Russia gets the upper hand, then it means that brutal raw force becomes the new power, and economics becomes second, third, fourth, fifth priority. And for China, I think that the outcome of this war would mean whether the collective West and the countries that basically share the Western values like democracy, freedom, justice, whether they can literally take care of each other. And because Taiwan shares the same values that we do. And if the collective West will fail on Ukraine, then the answer is obvious. The answer means that regardless all of the Western technologies, all of the Western training, all of the Western funds, all of the Western technologies, if Russia prevails, regardless of all of this, then basically, in a way, the West as we know it is not actual anymore. It's something that you should take into consideration, but it becomes something that doesn't play the first violin in global affairs, in global politics, in the military. And it's as simple as that. It's a very brutal way to say it, probably, but I think that this is pure realism, and countries like those, they are very realistic at what they are expecting from this conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria Lane.
Well, on this point, I certainly couldn't agree more with both of you. The geopolitical tensions in Asia and the implications for everybody are something that are very real and fundamental to our peace and security, and that's why the outcome in Ukraine is so critically important. And again, it continues to remind us of the fact that, and the U.S. and other nations, nobody can do this alone. This is something that it really requires all of us to pull together, the entire Western world and the partners and the allies, to ensure that, again, we're being smart about our resources, we're being smart about our strategic objectives, and that we continue to support Ukraine to fight the valiant fight here in Europe, and then hope that that is the deterrent that will prevent China from behaving badly in the Asian Pacific region. And again, it has profound implications, and another reason why AUKUS is important also for our collective future, to continue to figure out, how do we sensibly develop those capabilities and deterrent technologies that will keep the peace in that part of the world as well.
Secretary of State.
The question was about what's China really thinking, and will they be watching this? And actually, we spend a lot of time in discussions like this trying to second guess and what have you. And often the answer is just literally written down in front of us. A very, very good example of this is there's a book called The Long Game by somebody called Rosh Doshi, who'd spent time reading tens of thousands of Chinese documents, not terribly accessible, I imagine, from party congresses and policy documents, and as much as they could possibly get hold of. And China describes in detail through that book what China are looking for. I mean, they're looking to reorder the world order, as any empire would do. It's what America's done. It's what Britain did. It's what the Dutch did beforehand. That is what you do when you get power. It shouldn't be any great surprise. That is how the world works. And in answer to the specific question, of course they're watching. Actually, if you read that book, you'll see that they watched everything. They watched what happened in Brexit. They watched what happened in elections. They watched how the world responds in the books written before Ukraine. But they will be watching very carefully, of course. Which is why, agreeing with all the panellists, it's absolutely important that we hold together. Next week in Brussels, that's what I'll be doing with the contact group, because 50 nations, there's a lot of nations to hold together, and there are ways in which we can be of assistance. A very good example is Poland at the moment. There's some tensions, I think it's fair to say, between Ukraine and Poland. Poland have been magnificent, actually, throughout the conflict, taking in, I think, more than 1 million refugees, having an enormous amount of disruption across their border and elsewhere. They have an election going on. They are responding to domestic issues, and we want to help to use our influence to help keep the very broad coalition of nations helping Ukraine together. So this weekend I agreed to send Typhoon jets to Poland in advance of their elections on the 15th of October, because we can detect what's happening there is Putin is sort of rattling his saber and trying to, again, take advantage of the local politics or the politics in a nation state in order to destabilize, in order to create circumstances where that very broad coalition of 50 nations fractures. And we are absolutely going to work together to try to prevent that from happening. It's very possible to invent scenarios in our minds, very real scenarios that could create fractures. But actually, it was very, very possible on day one, you know, when the first invasion took place on the when the full-scale invasion took place on the 24th of February last year, it was very easy to imagine scenarios in which in 3 days Kyiv would be overrun, right? So it's always possible to imagine these scenarios that is different from them being allowed to happen, and that is what we'll commit ourselves to doing, not allowing those things to happen.
Brilliant. One final question. Do I see anyone? Have I missed anybody? Yes, gentleman there towards the front. Sorry if you would just wait till the microphone. So, name and organisation, please.
Thank you, Anthony McKellar from Bedfordshire. It's very good to hear the support, you know, going through, and as countries face domestic elections, as we will do in 14 months' time. The previous Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, had said that at elections, there's always going to be arguments for increase of domestic government spending on health and education. It's always good to make the case for defence, because I know the increase of over the next 5 years will be 11 billion. But I wondered if there was any guaranteed assurance that that increase of expenditure and defence spending will be safeguarded. Thank you. And especially in areas such as borough and finesse.
Air Marshal Stringer.
Well, I can't speak for any party on that. What I would say, though, is building on, if you extrapolate the answers many of us have given, especially Secretary of State today, let's not forget we do spend 52 billion, instead of one of the biggest spending countries there is. I still think there's a heck of a lot we could do to spend more efficiently. And I think once the MOD has demonstrated that, then it will be in a much better place to go back and make the demands of HMT.
Maria Lane.
I'm not sure I'm the right person to comment on that one.
Okay, domestic politics. All politics stops at the water's edge, as Senator Arthur Vandenberg of Michigan said. Very good. Dimitra.
Yeah, I think that this war has stimulated, reinvigorated the arms race. And what is an arms race? It's a redistribution of resources, isn't it? And by spending more on weapons, basically you are spending less on healthcare, education, sustainability, and so on and so forth. And this is one of the examples why wars should be ended for good. But no one can guarantee. There is no magic pillow for that. But however, I think this is an argument in favor of the sustainable development and upgrade of the weapons and technologies, armed technologies. But this is also a clear argument of why we should end this war for good, terminating this arms race and basically putting an end. And clearly showing that, again, technology progress dominate over brute force, over quantity of people, and that the deterrence is not just a nuclear weapon, but it's also the most sophisticated and technological weapon that you have at your disposal that can deter the person that the other side. The other side that can lose hundreds of persons without even having an opportunity to see what has eliminated them, you know. So I think this is basically the argument. Thank you.
Secretary of State, last word.
We do already have the largest defence budget in Europe, including our expenditure to Ukraine. I think it probably topped about 53.5 billion in this last year. But it is, as the Air Marshal said, it's not just about how much money you spend. It's such a sort of blunt and inaccurate argument. You know, in a world where we're talking about, you know, what did you describe as a cardboard or balsa wood and cardboard drones, or, you know, and we're seeing some extraordinary technology that I've gone to see them myself, which are quite often based on some very, very simple, but nonetheless incredibly effective use of resources. So it's not just about money, and defence actually, as with many big, large procurement projects, has often been dogged with the way in which that money's been spent, sometimes for very good reasons. If a project takes 20 years to complete, then 10 years in you work out that far better technology is available and people try to retrospectively fit it onto the other thing, and then the thing gets too heavy and then they have to redesign that, and then if it's an Ajax Jax it starts to rumble, and then you just see how these and one of the things, I've got a lot of experience from large procurement departments that have spent a lot of money, and so this is the thing which I think I can help with. So I don't think it's just about the budget. I do think also the really interesting point about defence spending is it's the money you spend that is on weapons that are never used, and the counterfactual, which is almost impossible to calculate, which could in fact be the best pound you ever spent. And that is completely different to almost any other, and I've run a lot of departments, right? I don't remember another department where I've deliberately spent money in the hope that I never use the asset. And that is what we do with our nuclear deterrent. It's why we're absolutely clear about the need to maintain that deterrent, and why that deterrent has brought us a degree of security in an uncertain world, potentially allowing us to go a little bit further and lead the pack when it comes to Ukraine in a way that others haven't necessarily done. And since we're at a political gathering, I should point out there's the Shadow Foreign Secretary who has voted serially against Trident. I think there's a member of the Shadow Defence Team who votes against Trident. With this government and Conservatives, we will always put our nuclear deterrent at the front of that line. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. You've been a brilliant audience. We've had an outstanding panel. Thank you to Air Marshal Stringer for his regular wisdom on a weekly basis to us, to Maria Lane, to Boeing for sponsorship, to Secretary of State for so early in your tenure coming to join us here, above all to Dimitra for the journey and to express our solidarity with Ukraine at this time. And I know you'll take away the strong and indeed unanimous support of this grouping from political and policy and civil and society and business in this country. And we wish you well for the future. Thank you very much.